studying the reflection of a man who had everything, or so it seemed. At 34, he owned Sullivan Construction, a mid-sized company that specialized in commercial buildings across 3 states. His calloused hands told the story of a man who'd worked his way up from swinging hammers to signing million-dollar contracts. The suburban house around him represented 8 years of marriage to Amy, his college sweetheart who'd waited patiently while he built his empire from nothing. Their 6-year-old son Luke was the pride of his life, a curious boy with Derek's steel-gray eyes and Amy's honey-blonde hair. "Dad, can we work on the treehouse today?" Luke appeared in the doorway, already dressed in miniature work clothes that mirrored Derek's own uniform. Derek smiled, the first genuine expression he'd worn all morning. "Sorry, buddy. Daddy has to finish the Henderson project. But this weekend, we'll get those support beams up." Luke's face fell slightly, but he nodded with the understanding maturity that sometimes worried Derek. 6-year-olds shouldn't have to be so accommodating. Amy emerged from their bedroom, phone pressed to her ear, her voice carrying that particular tone she used with her family. "No, Mom, I can't drive up there today. Derek needs me to—" She caught his eye and covered the phone. "Your mother wants Luke to stay overnight again. She says Dad's been asking about his grandson." Derek had noticed the increasing frequency of these overnight requests from Amy's parents, Robert and Linda Hartwell. The Hartwells lived an hour north in a sprawling farmhouse that had been in Amy's family for generations. Luke loved visiting his grandparents, but something felt off about the recent pattern. "Tell them next weekend," Derek said, grabbing his keys. "I've got that site inspection in Millbrook today. Won't be back until late." Amy's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Actually, honey, maybe it would be good for Luke. He's been cooped up here all week, and you know how much he loves helping Grandpa with the horses." There was an edge of insistence in her voice that Derek couldn't quite place. In the past few months, Amy had been different, distracted, secretive about her phone calls, often mentioning her brother Trevor's frequent visits to their parents' house. Trevor had recently moved back from Seattle after a messy divorce, supposedly to help with the family property. "Please, Dad." Luke tugged at Derek's work shirt. "Grandpa promised to teach me how to curry the horses properly." Derek studied his wife's face, noting the way she avoided his direct gaze. 8 years of marriage had taught him to read her subtle signals, and right now, every instinct screamed that something was wrong. But Luke's eager face made the decision for him. "All right, but you call me before bedtime, okay?" As Derek drove toward his work site, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a mistake. The Hartwell family had always been close-knit to the point of exclusion. They had old money from generations of farming and land development, and Derek had always sensed their disapproval of Amy marrying a blue-collar man who'd clawed his way up from nothing. His phone buzzed with a text from his foreman. "Henderson site's looking good. We might finish early." Derek made a mental note to surprise Amy and Luke by coming home early. Maybe they could still work on that treehouse. Chapter 2, Shattered Trust. The call came at 3:47 a.m. Derek jolted awake, instantly alert in the way that years of emergency calls from job sites had trained him. Amy's side of the bed was empty, which struck him as odd until he remembered she'd mentioned staying up late to work on some freelance graphic design project. "Dad, it hurts. Please help me." Luke's voice was barely a whisper, thick with tears and something that made Derek's blood turn to ice. In the background, he could hear Amy talking rapidly to someone, her voice strained with panic. "We're bringing him to Mercy General," Amy said when she took the phone. "Derek, something's wrong. He woke up screaming, holding his head. He's not coherent." Derek was already pulling on clothes, his mind racing through possibilities. Head injury, meningitis, poisoning. He'd never heard his son sound so broken, so small. The drive to the hospital blurred past in a haze of red lights and mounting dread. Derek found Amy in the emergency waiting room, her face pale and her clothes disheveled. She looked like she'd been awake all night. "Where is he?" Derek demanded. "Room 4. They're running tests." Amy's voice cracked. "Derek, I'm so scared. He was fine when I picked him up from Mom and Dad's. We got home around 9. He had some dinner, watched a movie, went to bed normal time. Then around 3, he just started screaming. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a woman in her 50s with kind but serious eyes, emerged from the examination room. Derek had seen that expression before, the careful neutrality that medical professionals wore when delivering devastating news. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, I need to speak with you privately." They followed her into a small consultation room, where Dr. Reeves closed the door and sat across from them. Derek's hands clenched involuntarily. "Luke is stable, but I'm very concerned about his symptoms. The neurological signs, combined with some physical evidence we've found, suggest possible traumatic brain injury. There are also traces of what appears to be chemical residue in his system." "Chemical residue?" Derek's voice was deadly quiet. "We're running more tests, but preliminary results suggest exposure to a sedative compound. Given the circumstances," Dr. Reeves paused, choosing her words carefully, "I'm required by law to report this. Mr. Sullivan, you need to call the police immediately." The world tilted on its axis. Derek heard Amy gasp, watched her face crumple with what looked like genuine shock and fear. But something nagged at him, a detail that didn't fit. "What physical evidence?" he asked. Dr. Reeves hesitated. "There are marks consistent with restraints on his wrists and ankles. Very faint, but present. And Mr. Sullivan, Luke keeps asking for his real daddy. He seems confused about who you are." Amy made a choking sound. "That's impossible. Derek is his father. He's just confused from whatever happened to him." But Derek was already reaching for his phone, his mind working with the cold precision that had built his business from nothing. Someone had hurt his son. Someone had drugged him, restrained him, and done something to make Luke question his own father. And Derek Sullivan was going to find out who. Chapter 3, The Video. 2 hours later, Derek stood in his in-law's driveway flanked by Detective Maria Santos and Officer James Bradley. The farmhouse looked exactly as it always had. White clapboard siding, wraparound porch, Amy's childhood swing still hanging from the old oak tree. But the silence was wrong. No dogs barking, no lights on, no sign of the Hartwells' usual bustling activity. Amy hung back near the patrol car, claiming she felt too sick to go inside. Derek noticed she kept checking her phone with increasing frequency. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell?" Detective Santos called out as she knocked on the front door. No answer. The door was unlocked, unusual for people who live this far from town. Derek followed the officers inside, his construction-trained eyes automatically cataloging details. Dishes in the sink for what looked like last night's dinner. Amy's mother's reading glasses on the kitchen table. Everything normal except for the absence of people. That's when they heard it, the sound of a television playing from the family room. Derek stepped into the doorway and froze. On the 65-inch flat screen, a video was playing on what looked like a continuous loop. The footage was clearly from a hidden camera, high definition and professionally lit. The video showed this very room, filmed 3 days ago, according to the timestamp. Derek watched his son Luke sitting on the familiar couch, but something was terribly wrong. Luke's movements were sluggish, his eyes unfocused. He was talking to someone off camera in a voice that sounded drugged and distant. "Tell Uncle Trevor what Daddy does that makes you scared," a male voice encouraged from behind the camera. Luke's drugged voice responded with words that made Derek's vision red with rage. "Daddy hits me when I'm bad. He locks me in the closet. He says if I tell anyone, he'll hurt Mommy." The voice behind the camera belonged to Trevor Hartwell, Amy's brother. But it was the female voice that made Derek's world explode. Amy's voice, clear and unmistakable. "That's perfect, baby. Now remember, when the police ask you about Daddy, you tell them exactly what you just said. Can you do that for Mommy and Uncle Trevor?" Derek's hands shook as he watched his drugged 6-year-old son nod obediently, his small face slack with whatever they'd given him. The video continued, showing Trevor and Amy coaching Luke through multiple rehearsals of false abuse allegations, perfecting their manufactured evidence against Derek. But the worst part came at the end. Amy leaned into frame, kissing Trevor with an intimacy that spoke of months, maybe years of deception. Then she turned to Luke with a smile that Derek had never seen before. Cold, calculating, predatory. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Once Daddy's gone, you'll have a new daddy who loves you much more." Detective Santos was already on her radio, calling for backup and an APB on the Hartwells and Trevor. Officer Bradley was taking notes, but Derek barely heard the activity around him. Everything clicked into place with brutal clarity. The overnight visits that had increased in frequency. Amy's secretiveness about her family. Trevor's sudden return to town. The custody documents Derek had glimpsed Amy hastily hiding last month. Luke's recent nightmares and behavioral changes that Derek had attributed to normal childhood growing pains. They'd been systematically poisoning his son's mind, drugging him to make him compliant, coaching him to lie about abuse that never happened. All to steal Luke away and destroy Derek in the process. Amy appeared in the doorway behind them, and Derek turned to face his wife of 8 years. The woman who had stood beside him as he built everything from nothing. The woman who had given him the most precious thing in his life, only to try to take it away with lies and manipulation. "Derek, I can explain," she began. Derek's voice, when it came, was quieter than a whisper and more terrifying than a scream. "Don't." Detective Santos stepped forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, I need you to come with me. We have some questions." As the detective led Amy away, Derek stared at the frozen image on the television screen, his son's drugged, confused face looking directly at the camera. Luke had trusted these people. Derek had trusted these people. Derek Sullivan had built his fortune on a simple principle. Measure twice, cut once. Be thorough, be precise, and never make the same mistake twice. As he watched the patrol car disappear down the driveway with his wife in the back seat, Derek began planning with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him millions. They had hurt his son. They had betrayed his trust. They had tried to destroy his life with lies. Derek Sullivan didn't believe in forgiveness. He believed in consequences. And consequences, he decided, were about to become very, very expensive for everyone involved. Chapter 4. The Builder's Foundation. Derek sat in the sterile hospital room, watching Luke sleep, the boy's small hand dwarfed by his father's calloused palm. The sedatives were slowly leaving Luke's system, but the psychological damage would take longer to assess. Dr. Reeves had explained that recovered memory therapy might be necessary, that Luke's confusion about reality versus the coached lies could persist for weeks or months. Derek's phone buzzed constantly. Reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story, concerned employees, his lawyer Marcus Reed, demanding updates. Derek ignored them all. Right now, only two things mattered: Luke's recovery and the meticulous planning of what came next. The irony wasn't lost on him. Derek had spent years building a reputation as a man who finished what he started, who never backed down from a challenge, who solved problems with systematic precision. Now, he would apply those same skills to a very different kind of construction project. Derek's journey to success hadn't been gentle. Born to a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them housed, he learned early that the world respected strength and crushed weakness. His mother, Sarah Sullivan, had died when Derek was 19, leaving him with nothing but her work ethic and a bone-deep understanding that survival meant being harder than everyone trying to tear you down. He'd built Sullivan Construction from a single pickup truck and a toolbox, taking on jobs that established contractors wouldn't touch, the dangerous ones, the impossible deadlines, the clients who'd burned every other builder in town. Derek delivered anyway, building his reputation on the principle that his word was concrete, unbreakable once set. Amy had entered his life during his 3rd year of business school, a night program he attended while working construction during the day. She was everything he wasn't: refined, educated, from a family with generational wealth and social connections. She claimed to love his authenticity, his work-worn hands, his refusal to pretend he was anything other than what he was. For 8 years, Derek had believed that love was real. He'd worked 16-hour days to give Amy the life she'd grown up with, to prove himself worthy of the Hartwell family's acceptance. He'd built their dream house with his own hands, installed every fixture, sanded every piece of trim. He'd thought he was building a foundation for their future. Instead, he'd been building a prison for himself. Luke stirred, his eyes fluttering open with the confused awareness of a child waking in an unfamiliar place. "Dad, I'm here, buddy." Derek squeezed his son's hand gently. How are you feeling? My head hurts, and I had weird dreams. Luke's voice was stronger now, more like himself. Dad, why did Uncle Trevor give me that nasty medicine? It made everything fuzzy. Derek's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice calm. Uncle Trevor made some bad choices, Luke, but he's not going to hurt you anymore. I promise. Is Mommy in trouble? The question was innocent, but Derek heard the undercurrent of a child trying to process betrayal by people he trusted. Mommy made some bad choices too, Derek said carefully, but you don't need to worry about any of that. Your job is just to get better. After Luke fell back asleep, Derek stepped into the hallway and finally returned Marcus Reed's calls. Marcus had been his lawyer since the early days of the business, a sharp-minded man who understood that sometimes the law and justice weren't the same thing. Derek, I've been watching the news coverage. This is a nightmare, but we can work with it. The video evidence is powerful, and with Luke's medical records showing drug exposure, we can nail Amy and her family for child endangerment, conspiracy, false accusation. I don't want them nailed, Derek interrupted quietly. I want them destroyed. Silence on the other end. Marcus had known Derek long enough to recognize the difference between anger and cold, calculated intent. Derek, I understand you're angry, but we need to be smart about this. The legal system will. The legal system will give Amy probation and court-ordered therapy. Trevor will get a few years, maybe less with good behavior. The Hartwells will claim they were manipulated by their son and daughter. And I'll spend the next decade in family court fighting for custody while Luke grows up traumatized by this mess. Derek looked through the window at his sleeping son. That's not acceptable. What are you thinking? Derek smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. I'm thinking about construction, Marcus. When you're building something meant to last, you don't just focus on what people can see. The real work happens in the foundation, underground, invisible, but absolutely critical. If the foundation fails, everything above it comes down. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I can't be part of anything illegal, Derek. You won't be. In fact, legally, you're going to make sure everything I do is completely above board. I need you to file for emergency custody, restraining orders, asset protection, the works. By the time you're done, I want every legal protection possible for Luke and myself. And what are you going to be doing while I handle the legal foundation? Derek's smile turned predatory. I'm going to remind some people why you don't steal from a builder. We know how to tear things down just as well as we know how to put them up. Chapter 5. Gathering the Crew. 3 days later, Derek sat in the private dining room of Castellanos, an upscale restaurant where he'd closed some of his biggest deals. Across from him sat Vincent Torres, a man whose business card simply read problem solver, but whose reputation in certain circles was far more specific. Vincent was 42, impeccably dressed, and possessed the kind of calm demeanor that came from handling situations that would break lesser men. Derek had first met him 5 years ago when a competitor had tried to sabotage a major project with false safety violations and bribed inspectors. Vincent had made that problem disappear so thoroughly that Derek's competitor had quietly left the state. I heard about your family situation, Vincent said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. Terrible thing, using a child like that. In my culture, such behavior would be addressed definitively. Derek appreciated that Vincent never minced words or pretended to be something he wasn't. I'm not looking for anything permanent, Vincent. Not yet, but I need some people hurt in ways that matter to them. Hurt how? Financially? Professionally? Physically? All of the above, but carefully orchestrated. Amy and Trevor think they're clever, but they're amateurs. They made one critical mistake. They assumed I'd roll over and play the victim. Vincent smiled approvingly. What do you need? Derek slid a thick folder across the table. Complete financial records for Amy, Trevor, and the Hartwells. Every bank account, every investment, every asset. I also need surveillance on all of them, where they go, who they talk to, what they do when they think no one's watching. And Trevor specifically? Derek's expression hardened. Trevor's been unemployed since he moved back from Seattle. But someone's been funding their operation, the video equipment, the drugs they used on Luke, the legal consultation fees. I'm betting they've already paid. I want to know where that money came from. Vincent nodded. Give me 48 hours. What else? I need you to reach out to some of our mutual friends in construction, specifically anyone who's worked with Highland Development Group. Highland Development was the Hartwell family's primary business. They'd been buying and developing rural properties for 3 generations. Robert Hartwell currently served as CEO, with Trevor recently added as a development consultant despite having zero experience in construction or real estate. You want to hit their business? I want to understand their business first. Then I want to systematically dismantle it. Derek leaned back in his chair. See, Vincent, Amy and Trevor think this is about custody and divorce. They're planning for a legal battle. But they forgot something important about me, which is I don't just build buildings. I build relationships, partnerships, networks. And sometimes those relationships become very valuable when you need to apply pressure. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Emergency custody granted. Assets frozen. Amy's bail hearing tomorrow. There's one more thing, Derek said, pocketing his phone. I need a message delivered to Trevor. Nothing threatening, nothing traceable. Just educational. Vincent raised an eyebrow. Trevor thinks he's safe because he hasn't been arrested yet. He's probably planning his next move, maybe thinking about fleeing. I want him to know that running won't help him. That nowhere is far enough. What kind of message? Derek pulled out his business card, and wrote something on the back before sliding it across the table. Vincent read it and smiled. The card read, Foundations are meant to last forever. D.S. Cryptic, Vincent observed. Trevor will understand. He's been hearing about my construction projects for years at family dinners. He knows what happens when you build on unstable ground. Vincent pocketed the card. Anything else? Derek stood and dropped several $100 bills on the table. Yes, I want you to find out everything you can about Amy's activities over the past year. Phone records, travel history, credit card statements. She's been planning this for a while, which means there's a paper trail. You think there's more to discover? Derek's smile was cold as winter steel. Vincent, you don't drug a 6-year-old and coach him to lie about abuse on a whim. This was planned, methodical, and sophisticated, which means Amy and Trevor had help, professional help. And when we find out who helped them, Derek headed for the door, his answer floating back over his shoulder like a promise and a threat. Then we expand the foundation. Chapter 6, Setting the Charges. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town had been one of Derek's first major acquisitions, a hulking steel and concrete structure that he'd planned to convert into luxury lofts. Tonight, it served a different purpose. Tonight, it was his war room. Derek stood before a wall covered in photographs, documents, and connecting strings that would make a detective proud. 5 days of Vincent's investigation had yielded more than Derek had hoped for and worse than he'd feared. Amy's betrayal ran deeper than adultery. The financial records showed a pattern of systematic theft dating back 14 months. She'd been siphoning money from their joint accounts, liquidating investments, even taking out loans against Derek's business assets using forged signatures. The total amount approached $340,000. But the money was just the beginning. Phone records revealed that Amy had been in contact with Dr. Margaret Ashford, a child psychologist who specialized in testifying for custody cases. Dr. Ashford's services included memory recovery therapy and trauma assessment, services that could be shaped to support whatever narrative her clients needed. Most damning of all, Vincent had discovered that Trevor wasn't just Amy's brother and lover. He was her partner in a scheme that extended far beyond Derek's family. Show me the Seattle connection again, Derek said to Vincent, who stood beside a laptop displaying financial transactions. Trevor wasn't unemployed in Seattle. He was working for Hartwell Development's Western expansion under a shell company. But here's the interesting part. Highland Development Group has been systematically acquiring properties around your commercial projects. Every major job Sullivan Construction has completed in the past 3 years, Highland has bought adjacent or nearby land within 6 months. Derek studied the map Vincent had created, marking his construction projects with red pins and Highland's acquisitions with blue pins. The pattern was unmistakable. Highland had been following Sullivan Construction's success, positioning themselves to profit from Derek's work without the investment or risk. They've been using insider information, Derek realized. Amy knew about every project before I even submitted bids. It gets worse. Trevor's been photographing your project documents, blueprints, client lists. They've been selling your business intelligence to competitors and using it to position Highland for maximum profit. Derek felt the familiar cold fury that had driven him through every challenge of his life. How much? Conservative estimate? Highland Development has gained approximately $2.8 million in land value appreciation by following your projects, plus another $400,000 in consulting fees they've earned by selling your proprietary information. Derek turned to study another section of his evidence wall, surveillance photos of Trevor and Amy meeting with various individuals over the past month. Who are these people? Vincent pointed to each photo as he spoke. Dr. Margaret Ashford, the child psychologist who would have testified that Luke showed signs of abuse trauma. Detective Raymond Pike, he's been feeding Amy information about the investigation. Judge Patricia Holbrook, she was scheduled to preside over your custody hearing. Schedule. Vincent's smile was predatory. Judge Holbrook received an anonymous tip about some irregularities in her financial disclosures. She's recused herself from all family court cases pending an ethics investigation. Derek raised an eyebrow. Anonymous tip? Very anonymous. Untraceable, but very well documented. Derek appreciated Vincent's thoroughness. What about Detective Pike? Internal Affairs received a package yesterday containing evidence of Pike's gambling debts and some interesting phone calls with Trevor Hartwell. Pike's been suspended pending investigation. And Dr. Ashford? Vincent's expression grew darker. That's where things get interesting. Dr. Ashford has done this before. Multiple times. Vincent pulled up a file on his laptop. 7 cases over the past 5 years where she's testified that children showed signs of abuse, helping mothers gain custody from fathers. In 6 of those cases, the fathers later committed suicide. Derek felt ice in his veins. They weren't planning to just take Luke. They were planning to destroy me completely. The pattern suggests that Amy and Trevor weren't working alone. This looks like a professional operation, a network that specializes in manufacturing custody cases against wealthy fathers. Derek turned to face Vincent fully. I want names. All of them. I'm working on it. But Derek, this is bigger than your family. If we move too aggressively, too quickly, we might alert the network and lose our chance to take them all down. Derek understood the logic, but his patience was wearing thin. Luke was in therapy, struggling to separate reality from the lies that had been drilled into his head. Amy was out on bail, living with a court-appointed guardian, but still making phone calls to unknown numbers. Trevor had disappeared entirely, last seen crossing into Canada using a fake passport that Vincent's people had somehow missed intercepting. How long? Derek asked. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. I need to trace the full network, identify all the players, and gather enough evidence to destroy them permanently. Derek nodded slowly. Fine. But Vincent, I want insurance. If any of them try to hurt Luke again, if they make any move against my son, I don't care about the network. I'll handle them myself. Vincent studied Derek's face and apparently saw something that satisfied him. Understood. In the meantime, I have a suggestion. I'm listening. Let them think they're winning. Amy's bail conditions allow supervised visitation with Luke. Let her see him. Let her think she still has a chance at custody. People make mistakes when they're confident. Derek's hands clenched involuntarily. The thought of Amy anywhere near Luke made him want to tear the warehouse apart with his bare hands. I know it's hard, Vincent continued, but desperate people are unpredictable. Confident people follow patterns, and patterns can be exploited. Derek looked at the evidence wall one more time, his eyes lingering on a photo of Luke taken before any of this started, his son laughing, innocent, trusting. That boy was gone forever, replaced by a child who flinched when adults spoke in loud voices and asked if his daddy was really going to hurt mommy. Set it up, Derek said finally. But Vincent, while they're following their patterns, I want you to arrange a few surprises for our friends. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable, but I want them to understand that their actions have consequences. What kind of surprises? Derek's smile was the kind that had made grown men step aside on construction sites. The kind that remind people why they should be very, very careful about the foundations they choose to build their lives on. Chapter 7, Demolition Day. The message came on a Tuesday morning while Derek was having breakfast with Luke. His son was slowly returning to normal, eating better, sleeping through the night, asking questions about school and friends instead of wondering if his memories were real. The text was from Vincent. The house of cards is ready to fall. Are you? Derek had been ready for 2 weeks. The first surprise had been Trevor's attempt to return to the United States. He'd made it as far as the customs checkpoint in Buffalo before being arrested on federal charges of identity theft and fraud. The fake passport Vincent's people had overlooked turned out to be part of an FBI sting operation targeting document forgers. Trevor was now facing 5 to 10 years in federal prison. The second surprise had been Highland Development Group's sudden financial crisis. It seemed that several of their major land acquisitions had been made with loans secured by properties that didn't actually belong to Highland. Robert and Linda Hartwell were scrambling to explain to federal investigators how their company had borrowed $1.3 million against land they didn't own. Derek suspected Vincent's creative accounting, but he didn't ask for details. The third surprise had been Amy's discovery that her new identity documents, the ones she'd planned to use when fleeing the country with Luke, had been flagged by Homeland Security as forgeries. Her court-appointed guardian had dutifully reported Amy's possession of illegal documents, resulting in additional federal charges and the revocation of her bail. Amy was now sitting in county lockup, finally understanding that her carefully planned escape routes had become dead ends. But today's message from Vincent meant the real demolition was about to begin. Derek dropped Luke off at school personally, hugging his son just a little longer than usual. I love you, buddy. Never forget that, okay? Luke looked up with those serious gray eyes that reminded Derek so much of his own reflection. I love you too, Dad. Are you going to be okay? You look worried. Derek knelt down to Luke's level. I'm not worried anymore, son. I'm just making sure some bad people can't hurt anyone else. An hour later, Derek sat in the federal courthouse listening to Assistant District Attorney Rachel Morrison outline the case against what she called the most sophisticated family court fraud network ever uncovered in this district. The investigation that Vincent had initiated had metastasized into a federal task force involving the FBI, IRS, and multiple state agencies. Dr. Margaret Ashford's therapeutic practice had been revealed as the centerpiece of a conspiracy that had destroyed dozens of families over the past decade. The scheme was elegant in its cruelty. Identify wealthy fathers in stable marriages, insert operatives to seduce or blackmail the wives, manufacture evidence of abuse using drugs, and coach children, then profit from the resulting custody battles and asset seizures. The network included judges, police officers, child welfare workers, therapists, and lawyers, all working together to systematically destroy innocent men while enriching themselves. Derek watched from the gallery as Amy was led into the courtroom in shackles. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of federal charges. When she caught sight of Derek, her expression shifted from despair to defiance to something that might have been regret. Derek felt nothing. Mr. Derek Sullivan, you may approach for your victim impact statement, the judge announced. Derek stood and walked to the podium, acutely aware that this moment would determine how the rest of Amy's life unfolded. The federal prosecutor had explained that Derek's statement could influence Amy's sentence, anywhere from 10 years to life, depending on the court's assessment of the damage done. Derek looked out at the packed courtroom. Media, federal agents, other victims, and their families. Vincent sat in the back row, his expression unreadable. Marcus Reed sat with the other attorneys, nodding encouragingly. Your Honor, Derek began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had closed million-dollar deals. My name is Derek Sullivan. I am a construction contractor, a business owner, and the father of a 6-year-old boy who was systematically poisoned and psychologically tortured by the woman I thought was his mother. Amy's shoulders shook, but Derek continued without looking at her. For 8 years, I believed I was building a life with someone who loved me. Instead, I was funding a criminal enterprise designed to destroy everything I had worked for. My son was drugged. My business was infiltrated. My reputation was targeted for demolition, by people who viewed my family as nothing more than a source of profit. Derek paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the courtroom. But, Your Honor, I'm not here to ask for mercy. I'm not here to plead for justice. I'm here to make a promise. The courtroom went completely silent. The network that targeted my family has been dismantled. The people who hurt my son are facing the consequences of their choices. And my son is safe, healthy, and learning to trust again. That's all the justice I need. Derek finally looked directly at Amy, who was staring at him with something approaching hope. Amy, Derek said quietly, I hope you use whatever time the court give you to think about the kind of person you chose to become. I hope you find a way to live with what you did to Luke. And I hope you understand that while I don't hate you anymore, I will never, ever forgive you. Derek turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I leave Amy's sentence to the court's wisdom. I have more important things to focus on than revenge. I have a son to raise. As Derek walked back to his seat, he could hear Amy sobbing behind him. He didn't turn around. Chapter 8, Aftershocks. 6 months after Amy's sentencing, 25 years to life for her role in the conspiracy, Derek stood in the kitchen of his new house, watching Luke help his grandmother Sarah make pancakes. Derek's mother had moved in 3 months ago, ostensibly to help with Luke's care, but really because Derek had finally admitted he needed help processing everything that had happened. The new house was smaller than the one Derek had built for Amy, but it felt more like home. Luke had chosen his own room colors, helped Derek build a tree house that actually got finished, and slowly began acting like a normal 6-year-old again. The therapy had helped. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a child psychologist with an impeccable reputation and no connection to Dr. Ashford's network, had worked with Luke to separate the manufactured memories from reality. The process had been painful for both father and son, but Luke was healing. Derek's phone rang. Vincent Torres, as usual. Derek, there's something you need to know. Trevor's been found dead in his cell. Derek felt a momentary chill. Suicide, that's the official story. But Trevor had been talking to federal investigators about the network's international connections. He was scheduled to testify next week about operations in Canada and Mexico. Derek understood the implication. Trevor's death wasn't self-inflicted. It was a message from whatever remained of the network. A reminder that some organizations had resources beyond federal prosecution. Do I need to be worried? Derek asked. Not immediately. But Derek, you should know that your actions have made you something of a legend in certain circles. You took down a network that law enforcement had been trying to crack for years. That kind of reputation brings attention, both good and bad. Derek looked through the kitchen window at Luke, who was covered in flour and laughing at something his grandmother had said. What kind of attention? The good kind. Several federal agencies want to consult with you about other networks. Your methods for uncovering the financial connections were impressive. The FBI thinks you have a future in forensic investigation if you're interested. Derek almost smiled. And the bad kind? Other networks know what you're capable of. They know you're thorough, relentless, and that you have resources. Some of them might see you as a threat to their operations. Derek had expected this conversation eventually. When you tear down something as sophisticated as Dr. Ashford's network, you inevitably discover that it wasn't operating in isolation. There are connections to other schemes, other victims, other predators who profited from destroyed families. What are you recommending? Enhanced security for you and Luke. Nothing obvious, nothing that would disrupt your normal life, but protection nonetheless. And Derek, if anyone approaches you about other cases, other networks, I want you to call me first. Derek agreed and hung up, but his mind was already working. Vincent was right. Derek had developed skills during his investigation that could be valuable to other victims. The systematic approach that had built Sullivan Construction could be applied to tearing down other criminal enterprises. His phone rang again. This time it was Marcus Reed. Derek, I just got off the phone with the FBI. They want to offer you a consulting contract. Apparently, your investigation into Highland Development uncovered connections to real estate fraud networks in 12 states. What kind of consulting? They want you to teach other victims how to investigate the people who target them, how to follow money trails, identify network connections, gather evidence. Basically, they want you to train people to do what you did to Amy's network. Derek found the idea appealing. There was something satisfying about the thought of teaching other fathers how to protect their children, how to fight back against predators who counted on their victims' helplessness. There's one condition, Marcus continued. The FBI wants to make sure you understand that your methods need to stay within legal boundaries. Some of what Vincent Torres did to help you existed in a gray area that federal agencies can't officially endorse. Derek understood. Vincent's creative approaches to gathering evidence and applying pressure have been effective, but not always strictly legal. If Derek was going to work with federal agencies, he'd need to develop methods that could withstand judicial scrutiny. I'll think about it, Derek told Marcus. But as Derek watched Luke and his grandmother bond over pancake making, he realized his thinking was already done. Amy and Trevor had counted on Derek's isolation, his willingness to suffer in silence rather than fight back. They'd assumed that a construction worker couldn't match their sophisticated planning. They'd been wrong about Derek, and Derek suspected they weren't the only ones making that mistake. There were other networks out there, other predators targeting other families. And Derek had learned that sometimes the best defense was a systematically planned offense. Derek walked into the kitchen and ruffled Luke's flour-covered hair. "Hey, buddy, want to help Dad with a new project?" Luke's eyes lit up. "What kind of project?" Derek smiled, thinking about the FBI's offer and all the families who were currently trapped in situations like his had been. "We're going to help some people build better foundations." Chapter 9, Legacy. 2 years later, Derek stood before a conference room filled with fathers, law enforcement officers, and victim advocates. The setting was FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and Derek was concluding his presentation on network investigation techniques for targeted families. The room was silent as Derek clicked through the final slides of his presentation. Photos of the 17 networks that had been dismantled using methods Derek had developed and refined. Each network had been similar to Dr. Ashford's operation. Sophisticated criminal enterprises that targeted wealthy men through their families, manufacturing evidence to destroy their victims while profiting from the resulting legal chaos. The key, Derek explained to his audience, is understanding that these operations rely on isolation and intimidation. They count on their victims feeling helpless, overwhelmed by false accusations and manufactured evidence. But every network leaves traces, financial connections, communication patterns, operational methods that can be mapped and exploited. A hand raised in the audience. "Mr. Sullivan, what about the emotional toll? How do you maintain objectivity when it's your own family being targeted?" Derek had been asked this question dozens of times over the past 2 years. The answer never got easier. "You don't maintain objectivity," he said quietly. "You use your anger. You channel it into systematic investigation and methodical action. The people who hurt my son counted on my emotional response being destructive and unfocused. Instead, I made it surgical." Another question, what's the most important lesson you've learned? Derek thought about Amy, currently serving her sentence in federal prison. She'd written him letters, dozens of them, seeking forgiveness, understanding, some acknowledgement that their marriage had been real before she'd chosen to destroy it. Derek had read every letter and responded to none. "Never confuse justice with revenge," Derek answered. "Revenge is emotional, temporary, and ultimately hollow. Justice is permanent. It protects future victims and ensures that bad actors face consequences that matter." After the presentation, Derek was approached by Agent Rachel Morrison, the same prosecutor who had handled Amy's case, now heading the FBI's task force on family court fraud. "Derek, we got a situation in Phoenix that fits the pattern. High-profile divorce attorney, child psychologist, family court judge, all connected, all profiting from manufactured custody battles. The local authorities are overwhelmed." Interested, Derek considered the offer. These consulting trips were becoming more frequent, and each case revealed new variations on the same basic scheme. The network that had targeted his family wasn't unique. It was part of a larger industry that treated destroyed families as profit centers. "Send me the files," Derek said. "But Rachel, I want something in return." "What?" "Access to the children who were victims in these cases. I want to fund therapy, education, whatever they need to recover for what was done to them." Rachel nodded approvingly. The Bureau has a victim services fund that could cover those costs. No, Derek said firmly. I'll cover them personally. These kids didn't ask to be weapons in their parents' war. They deserve better than bureaucratic support. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Luke. Dad, Grandma's teaching me how to make her famous meatloaf. Can we have it for dinner when you get home? Derek smiled and typed back, absolutely. Save me some room to help. Luke was 8 now, thriving in school, and showing no lasting effect from the trauma he'd endured. His memories of the drugged interrogations had faded, replaced by new experiences of trust, safety, and unconditional love. Luke knew his mother was in prison, knew she'd made terrible choices, but Derek had worked carefully to ensure that Luke understood Amy's actions weren't a reflection of his worth or Derek's love. As Derek walked through the airport heading home, he reflected on how much his life had changed. Sullivan Construction was more successful than ever, but Derek's passion now lay in dismantling the networks that preyed on families like his had been. He'd built a new kind of reputation, not just as a successful businessman, but as someone who could help victims fight back against sophisticated predators. The work was satisfying in ways that constructing buildings had never been. Every network he helped dismantle meant dozens of children who wouldn't be drugged and coached to lie about their fathers. Every corrupt official exposed meant countless families who wouldn't have their lives destroyed by manufactured evidence. Derek had learned something important about himself during his investigation of Amy's betrayal. He wasn't just good at building things. He was exceptional at taking apart complex systems and understanding how they worked. That skill, combined with the resources his business success had provided, made him uniquely qualified to fight predators who counted on their victims' helplessness. His phone rang as he boarded his flight home. Vincent Torres, as always. Derek, I've got something interesting. Remember Dr. Margaret Ashford's network had international connections? What did you find? Our friends in Phoenix aren't just running a local operation. They're part of something bigger, a franchise system that's operating in 37 states and 4 countries. Someone's been selling the blueprint for destroying families, complete with training materials and operational support. Derek settled into his seat as the plane prepared for takeoff. Send me everything you have. Derek, this is bigger than anything we've tackled before. We're talking about an organization that's destroyed thousands of families over the past decade. The resources they have, the connections they've built, taking them on would be dangerous. Derek finished. That's one word for it. Derek looked out the airplane window at the lights of D.C. fading below. Somewhere down, there were fathers who didn't know they were being targeted, children who were about to be turned into weapons against their own parents, families that were about to be destroyed for profit. 2 years ago, Derek would have focused on his own survival, protecting Luke and rebuilding their life together. But 2 years ago, Derek hadn't understood how many other families were facing the same systematic destruction that his had endured. Vincent, Derek said quietly, do you remember what I told you about foundations? That they're meant to last forever. That's right. And Vincent, I think it's time we build a foundation that these networks can't tear down. Something permanent. What did you have in mind? Derek smiled as the plane climbed toward cruising altitude, carrying him home to Luke and a life they'd built together from the wreckage of betrayal. I'm thinking about expansion, Vincent. Time to take Sullivan Construction into a new market. Which market is that? Derek's voice carried the quiet certainty that had driven him from a single pickup truck to a multi-million-dollar empire. Justice. And Vincent? I plan to build something in that market that lasts forever. As the plane flew through the night toward home, Derek began planning his most ambitious construction project yet, a systematic dismantling of every network that profited from destroyed families. It would take years, maybe decades. It would require resources, patience, and the kind of methodical precision that had made Derek successful in legitimate construction. But Derek Sullivan had learned something important about himself over the past 2 years. He was very, very good at tearing down structures that needed to come down. And some structures, Derek had decided, deserved nothing less than complete demolition. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.